Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Sarah Cody, and we're keeping it geekly with our new guest, Saladin Ahmed. We're here to break down TERRORWAR issue 1 and 2 and everything in between. Saladin, welcome to the stream. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. We were talking backstage about some of your previous works. I mean, you have credit for Black Bolt, Miles Morales, Miss Marvel, Batman Unburied, and a couple creator-owned IPs. Just, it seems like you've hit everything from like a childhood dream, even some short stories for Star Wars too. I gotta ask, where did this all begin for you?
Well, you know, I've been kind of telling stories since I was a little kid. I grew up in a kind of immigrant enclave near Detroit, in a factory town, and it wasn't the formal schooling was not super great, but my father was always a little bit of a nerd himself. He always had like science fiction stuff around, had comics around, and so that kind of storytelling was always in my life, even when I didn't care for formal school. So, you know, I really learned to read by reading like Marvel comics and Dungeons and Dragons books, basically. So, you know, that's my kind of heritage. So it made sense that when I went out into the world to kind of make a living as a writer, that I would eventually come to those forms. But I didn't really start publishing kind of licensed work really until like my 40s. I'm 47. And I spent a lot of years working on weird little poems that nobody except 5 other poets would read, or you know, working in short stories. I published a novel, so I've had a pretty varied career as a writer.
So do you feel like, does it hit a little bit differently when it's 5 like poets that you know that are reading and enjoying your work, as opposed to like the widestream public? You know what I mean? Just because like the poets might understand it a little bit more clearer.
Yeah, absolutely. There's you know, every kind of project has its own rewards, right? There's that intimacy, that collaboration. You know, this is 20 years ago. I was living in New York City. You're like hanging out with other poets, you know. I'm not a drinker, but going to the bars, you know, the cafes, whatever. And, you know, just talking poetry till late in the night. You know, that the kind of work you make in that setting is its own joy, right? But then the kind of work you make when you're working with characters that millions of people around the world know and love is it's an equal but different joy.
You know, and I cheated a little bit. I listened to an interview previously to kind of get a good feel, you know, maybe to pick up some Easter eggs and such. And one thing I found that was really remarkable is when you started writing for books where millions of people were reading it, it was a good feeling for you because you were able to kind of touch those millions of people where, you know, maybe like an indie book wouldn't have that reach.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's no getting around the fact that, you know, the bigger the platform, the bigger the kind of more familiar the characters, the more corporate the IP, you know, the bigger the reach is. And so I always want to like have one hand at least in that world where people, you know, who are normal people, I guess you could say, know what you're doing. You know, I like my mechanic listened to Batman Unburied, you know, which is a Spotify show. People can put that on, you know, and say, "What, you worked on that?" No shit. You know? So it's really, you know, to have something like that connects with just like everyday people who are doing this while they're doing their work is a different, yeah, it's a different vibe. Or working on a character like Spider-Man, who just, when you go to a convention, whether it's Peter or Miles, you know, the legions of people who connect so deeply. It's just, there's nothing like that. It's awesome to be part of telling those stories.
I think it's remarkable how it came like full circle too, how you kind of like, that's how you really taught yourself how to read, was those books. And now you're able to like encourage like hope and messages of your own to other potential people who are learning to read through these books as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's been interesting because that stuff has all become much more popular since I was a kid. You know, when I was 12, nobody knew who Iron Man was, right? and the idea that he would become, you know, not just like people knew who like Hulk was, Spider-Man. You know, there were a handful of superheroes who existed in the public consciousness outside of like us weirdos, and now people know like Black Panther being one of the most, you know, highest grossing movies of all time is mind blowing to me.
Yes.
in a good way.
Yes, and I think it's awesome too that we're seeing a lot of like this, new levels of diversity hitting comics in the mainstream as well. Because back then that wasn't happening either.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true.
So, I mean, if I'm correct, you were approached by Will Moss, 2016-17 to write Black Bolt, and then went on to win a 2018 Eisner Award for that series. Like, that is awesome.
Yeah, it's hard work. I'd like to think it's a little bit of talent, but it's a lot of luck too, so you never try and get too cocky about award stuff. It's to a degree, there's a lottery element to it. But I was very fortunate because, people ask often like, well, how do I get in with Marvel Comics? Right. And my snotty answer is like, spend 20 years like struggling in obscurity and then write a novel and then maybe somebody will read it. And that's basically what happened. Is Will Moss had read my Throne of the Crescent Moon, which is a fantasy novel, and Marvel at the time was looking for somebody to write Black Bolt, and human stuff in general, and the humans are sort of their science fiction-y fantasy. Saw some connective tissue between my fiction work and that, and so. So we started collaborating on a Black Bolt idea, and it just lit a fire in me, because I'd actually been sort of blocked as a writer before that. I'd written a first novel and sort of froze up writing a second novel because a lot of things going on, in my own life personally and creatively, and I was blocked. I was really writing like a couple short stories a year. Was not particularly productive, wasting too much time on Twitter, and tapping into comics really kind of, I don't know, gave me a second life creatively, and let me kind of, I think the collaboration element, especially when you're working with an editor, you're working with an artist, it's not as lonely as fiction can be. And so, it kind of woke me back up, and I was like, throw more at me. So then we did an Exiles book together, Quicksilver mini. I was voracious.
So did you have any like comic experience beforehand, or was it mostly just like fiction and prose writing?
No, I'd never written a comic book before. I mean, I'd read lots of it. Yeah. But I will say, I'd been trained as a writer in other forms, and there's no way I would come to the comic book form if I didn't have that unique combination of experiences of having read just shitloads of comics as a kid, and knowing the form, understanding how page turns work, right? Like how you tell time in between panels. Those are all technical things that you have to learn if you don't know comics. And the combination of that, and having spent, 20 some years honing my craft as a writer, if not in comics specifically, with a lot of stuff that you can carry lessons over into comics, right? So it wasn't, I cheated a little bit. It's not like I'm some sort of like, savant who the first time, picking up a pen wrote a great comic. I think we made a pretty awesome comic, but I had a lot of background in doing it.
I mean, you earned that background, right? You earned every bit of that experience working up to that. I mean, a savant and maybe other people's perspectives and the way you went about like earning and learning that experience to working to your first comic. I think that is an awesome journey, and that was just the start. I mean, after you won that award, you went on to write Miles Morales 2018. Did you get a chance to see Across the Spider-Verse yet?
So it's funny because people always assume that I'm like deep in that world, and for one thing, just organizationally, right? Marvel Studios, to say nothing of Sony, is fairly separate than the comics division in terms of, we're in different coasts, people have different offices, so you influence each other a bit, but it's not quite a collaborative thing. And for me, I knew that there was a Miles animated movie in the works. I knew the guys involved with it and trusted them all, and I did not want to know anything about what they were doing when the first movie was being made, right? I didn't want to get a glimpse of it. And I didn't, I went to that movie like a civilian with my kids who were much younger at the time. And we just bought a ticket, went and sat at the movies like everybody else, and experienced it along with everybody else. And that's what I'm going to do for this one. I really, I love that Miles' story is told across these different media, but I think that to do it yourself, you kind of have to go in a little bit of a silo, I think. And so I have not gotten to the movies yet because I'm beholden to my children's schedules. So
yeah.
But,
that could be tough. That could be tough. You know, I was curious because it always has to be a really unique feeling, you know, being, you know, a person who is like kind of within that mindset of Miles and then seeing him on an animated screen. I mean, that just has to be just euphoric.
yeah, it's really a trip. I mean, Miles as much as any other character, Kamala as well, but especially Miles, just he's blown up so big in the film, in the PlayStation game. I mean, you know, just online, you know, like it's wild because the thing about comics is people who've never necessarily read your comic, right, will in the social media age will clip panels, right, where they love what you made Miles say, right, and then that becomes viral, and it's just bizarre because you know, you wrote that as part of a script, but it gets, like movie clips nowadays, like anything else, it gets kind of a little piece of it taken out, and then it takes on its own life out there in the social media universe. And I love seeing that kind of stuff. You know, I love seeing people who are geeked by the games get into the movies, people who watch the movie by the comics, and that's part of why I think it's cool to kind of have each of us doing our own thing, because then when they come and see a different iteration of the character, they can just kind of experience it in a different way in each media.
And speaking of different media, let's kind of push it back to Batman Unburied. I mean, this is a whole different type of media where you're just listening to it. How was that experience for you, writing something where it was intended to kind of be acted out in an audio fashion?
Yeah, this has been a new experience for me. So Batman Unburied is an audio series on Spotify, kind of full production values for folks who haven't listened to it, Hollywood actors. And I got the call from David Goyer, filmmaker who made like the Dark Knight movies and stuff. He and I had worked together. I'd done a little bit of kind of sneaky working on the Foundation TV series, science fiction series for Apple TV with him. And he and I hit it off. So, you know, I've done a couple little things with him, and he was scheming up a audio series for Batman and wanted to just kind of really go in a different direction in terms of the depiction of Gotham. It was from the get, it was a kind of principle to have like a people of color centered cast, and to have a kind of tone that is even in some ways darker than the films. You know, like this is definitely R-rated stuff in the podcast in a way that you can't get away with visually in a Batman film. Like there's cannibalism and it's been funny seeing the reaction to the audio specifically, because it's a new form to write in, right? You can't, comics, it's almost the opposite of comics, because comics are so visual, right? That you're truly co-creating with the artist, right? In a fight scene, I don't script a whole lot, right? I tend to say, you know, these are the beats that has to happen, you know, Miles has to cloak in this moment and such, and then, you know, Rhino needs to end up knocked out by the end of page 3, but you don't script every single punch, right? That's artists often doing that stuff, and you're relying on their visual work. But in audio, you don't have any of that, right? And in a Batman story, it's kind of funny because, you know, he's a detective, but he's also an action-oriented character, and so it's very different storytelling. You can't really have visual action pieces. You have to emphasize kind of unraveling mystery a little bit more. You can't, you know, like costumes, you don't see costumes, right? So we're working, I think it's coming out in the fall. We're done working actually on the follow-up to Batman Unburied, which I kind of actually more central in. I was one of the writers on Batman Unburied season 1, but based on the work I did on there, Spotify asked me to do a Riddler sequel. We had Hassan Minhaj playing the Riddler in Batman Unburied, and so they've announced that he's going to star in a spin-off series that's Riddler focused. And so you know, we've been working furiously on that, and it's just fun. It's fun to work in this different mode where you have to use different tools to tell the story, and then just watching actors interpret your script is so cool. It's so fun and because it's audio, they're not like stressed out on a Hollywood set where they're being filmed and they're all day and being pushed to their limit. They're going into a, you know, fairly chill recording booth. And I was watching, like, I think it was the Game Fest announcements yesterday for Baldur's Gate 3. I'm a big D&D nerd, and I Baldur's Gate 2 game was like one of my favorite games of all time, right? And it's funny because they did a trailer where they're showing that Jason Isaacs, who's in the Harry Potter movies, is recording a voice, and they're like showing him with the headphones on. And we worked with Jason; he was our Alfred in Batman Unburied. So it's just so funny to see people in that element, and it's a whole
so
world
cool.
I really dig further into. Audio's amazing, and I think one of the kind of really forms of the future, going kind of taking it back to radio play days, but people can do other stuff, and we're in such a multitasking age that I think people, when people can listen and do something, I think there's something compelling about that.
You know, and it pulls on so many different emotions and puts you in such a different level of immersion. I mean, World of the Wars was a radio show that put people in fear. You know, we thought we were being invaded by aliens. Like, I mean, so I think you're onto something, especially in this day and age when there's, you know, you have 5 different screens going on. You know, having that something you could just listen to really just sets the tone for you. And man, congratulations on the spinoff. That is so awesome. I cannot wait to see, you know, what you guys do with the Riddler. This sounds like it's just going to be an awesome series. And speaking of that, let's dive into a couple of your own creator-owned IPs. I mean, we have these 2 phenomenal volumes right here. We have a TERRORWAR, and we also have a STARSIGNS. So, I mean, which came first for you?
Well, ABBOTT was my first creator-owned book. Boom Comics came to me after Black Bolt, and we're basically like, have you thought of any kind of creator-owned ideas? And you know, it's a comic that's about Detroit. I'm from Detroit, and it's a comic about the 1970s. It's really about a Black woman reporter who is kind of battling all of the stuff that you would battle as a Black bisexual woman at the time, right? Workplace nastiness, kind of structural racism, but it's also a cult story, right? So the idea is that Elena Abbott, title character, is sort of, you know, the best reporter in Detroit, chain smoking, kind of hard bitten, you know, very much a noir character, and she's uncovering a kind of occult conspiracy that claimed her husband's life. And so it's this story of her kind of figuring out excuse me, that conspiracy, and then what it means for the city of Detroit. So it's and then the second volume in that series is equally kind of historical. It's about the election of Detroit's first Black mayor and stuff like that. But there's also a council of evil wizards, right? So that's the kind of stuff that I just love to do, is to take real history or real places to honor the specificity of where people come from, and to use that to kind of fuel, you know, these really exciting stories about whatever, werewolves or aliens or elves or whatever it happens to be, to inflect those kind of stories with that kind of real world texture. To me is like the job, I guess.
And I loved it. I had a chance to read issue 1, I think, and then I went out and bought both volumes. I just loved just her personality as a whole, like her character, like her reasoning, the way she handles those. But yeah, I hope those police get justice served to them, rightfully so, in a very violent way. They are pricks. You do such a good job of writing such hateable characters, and I can't wait to see where that series goes. Now, we have STARSIGNS and TERRORWAR. I read issue 1 and 2 of TERRORWAR. Let's save that for last. Let's talk a little bit about STARSIGNS. I mean, I'm looking at the cover right here. It is so gorgeous. Like, just the colors on this is just beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful is kind of a lot of what we were going for with this book. STARSIGNS, the first issue dropped in May. We're on issue 2 now that just came out in mid-June here. It's a book that I'm working on with Megan Levins as the line artist, and Kelly Fitzpatrick as the colorist, and Sean Lee doing letters. It's the premise is essentially that the constellations of the zodiac disappear from the sky one day. Ooh. And nobody knows why. Is this an act of God? Is it environmental catastrophe? But what ends up happening is they re-manifest on Earth, sort of linked to 12 different people. And so each of these people gains what we'd essentially call superhero type powers, right? One person can stop time, one person can turn invisible, one person's super strong, and each person corresponding to a star sign. And it's a story about, you know, I love like old Claremont X-Men, right? First couple seasons of Heroes, stories that are about again, that are like about superpowers and cool big battles between superpower groups, but are really also about like these very specific groups of people, the dynamics they have with each other. These diverse sort of found family stories are something that I love, and so all of that is sort of at the forefront of Star Signs.
Well, hopefully you gave the Virgo a super cool power, because Virgos need to get some justice at some point as well.
Yeah, Virgo's a kick-ass character. She's one
okay, let's go.
Let's go. Show up actually.
So last but not least, we have TERRORWAR issue 1 and 2. This was a phenomenal ride. We have our main protagonist, Mohammed. He is in Blue City fighting terrors, and these things are next level. These are like they manifest your deepest, darkest, whatever you're afraid of, and just come to life. And I just loved how out of this world this experience was. Kind of that first view of Blue City was just, I got so awestruck just how mesmerizing it was.
That's all Dave Acosta, the artist on that. I really TERRORWAR is so as you say, like the premise is essentially that there is this city in the future. It's science fictional, and there are these creatures that are haunting this city, and they are called terrors, and they take the form of people's greatest fears, and they really can't be killed except by a select few folks who we don't yet know why they have the ability to do so. This will be explored in the series, and so those kinds of end up forming kind of not really military teams, but basically gig economy teams, right? The tagline for the series is "We're not heroes, we're contractors," right? Mm-hmm. And wanted to look, but keep it, like, as you're saying, kind of mesmerizing visually, right? And Dave Acosta is he can draw anything. He's insane. We worked together previously on the original graphic novel Dragon, which is a medieval Dracula story. His art style was completely different for that, much more book illustrative. And then he flipped to like kind of more 90s comic, like extreme for TERRORWAR. And it's just bananas how he can do that and do both things fully well. So this is a series with, cybernetic eyes that light up, big giant laser rifles, freaky looking monsters. It's like everything dialed to 11.
And it's over the top, and I think the character development is just as good too. I loved the cast of characters and just the situations you put them in. I mean, I don't know, are we allowed to talk a little bit about issue 1, or keep some of it kind of?
Please.
So please. I loved how when you started it, you kind of had Mohammed like reflecting on his early days as a kid, just getting high, watching TV, and then he's in the marketplace, and just how lived in it felt. Like, with the community, you could tell he's a community man right away. The vendor wants to feed him. Like, I know you probably haven't eaten, like, take a bite, and then action starts right off the rip. I kind of just loved how you didn't pull any punches. It got right to business. And then this thing is just a huge frog in red overalls, and I loved how, like, it's like such a tense moment, and then you see this thing, it's like, what is this? Yeah, so, I mean, what was the inspiration? I mean, we were talking backstage. This dude had to have gone through some very traumatic experience, right?
I don't know. I think a lot about childhood for being 47 years old. And I think a lot of us have like weird shit from TV or movies when we were little kids that still freaks us out a little bit when we think about it, right? Like some weird Muppet or whatever it is that like creeped you out when you were a kid. And so the idea is, what if that came to life as like 20 foot tall and tried to basically burn you alive?
And these things are very chaotic. I mean, you can't hurt this if you're just a regular individual. We see, the dude tries to stab it. It grabs him and he turns into ash. You got to have a certain, is it cybernetic like upgrade, like something in the brain. The eye glows blue, and then boom, boom, that laser just melts this thing. I loved it.
Yeah, they call them brain bullets, and we'll find out more in this series about kind of why some folks are able to generate them and why some aren't.
And the beauty of this too is, so these guys, you know, they're protecting the city, Blue City, but it's also a bounty. So this is how they make their living. And unfortunately, Mohammed didn't mark this bounty, so none of him or his team's getting paid. But that's the least of their worries, because then, you know, if they do mark it, they have to fight against other poachers. And that, I just love the way you structured and layered this story. I mean, we have these huge forces that are just, you know, killing humanity as it stands. And then it's sprinkled with just like this inner team, like drama going on, you know, team fighting team and survival. I mean, shoot, what was some of your influences when you were, you know, writing out this script? Like, was there any certain like movies or books you were pulling from, or, you know, drawing ideas from?
Yeah, I mean, just overall, the influences on the book are, they're as much cinematic as comics. You know, it's really, Dave and I are both dudes in our 40s, like nerds raised on 80s, you know, sci-fi cinema, right? So there's a little bit of Aliens in there, there's a little bit of Blade Runner in there, even a little bit of Ghostbusters in there, right? And all that DNA, I guess we are trying to kind of update for the 21st century with a story that's about, as you say, about making money, and about the fact that, you know, whatever it is, whether it's soldiers, you know, exterminators, like everybody exists in an economy, right? And so I think so often when we tell stories about like whatever, people hunting monsters or saving the world or whatever it is, we just never stop to ask, like, how are they making a living? You know, how you know, how do you put food on the table while you're doing this? And so I'm always, you know, I'm from a working class background. I'm always curious about that. I always think about that stuff. And I also am a sucker for the trope of like good guy team versus bad guy team with like weird kind of counterparts on the team. I love doing that kind of stuff. I did it in Exiles. So in issue 2, we've got a big, in the first couple pages, we've got a big kind of near splash where we just have the 2 teams of 5 or 4 people each leaping at each other and little name tags under each, so we know who each is. And, you know, I love that because it's design, you know, and then Dave can go crazy designing. Sometimes it'll be a character who's only going to live 5 pages, but Dave will make them look fucking amazing. So
Dave killed it. I loved when these terrorists were getting like vaporized, just how brutal and gory it was. It was just phenomenal. And then, you know, when characters are getting brutalized, that is just as awesome as well. I mean, Dave just went to town. What did that script process look like between you two? Did you kind of just give him like the plot points and let him kind of just take the wheel, or?
You know, I tend, I came from comics, from writing novels, right, where you have to describe everything, right? You don't have an artist to work with. The only thing that the reader has is your words, right, to conjure this story and every visual thing in it in their mind, right? And it's different to go to comics where you're really working collaboratively with an artist. Like when you write a novel, the manuscript that you write, that's the finished product. It gets edited and such, but that's the finished product, is your words. When you work on comics, your words are not really the finished product. That's a script that then the artist, colorist, letterer work on to make a finished product. And it's when I first started working like on Black Bolt back in 2017, 2016, Christian Ward really kind of held my hand. It was like, dude, you don't need to spell out everything in every panel. Like, that's my job, you know? And there's still this part of me that feels like if I don't give the artist everything, that I'm slacking off, that I'm making and I have this weird thing about like leaving other people responsible for my work. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. With certain artists, you learn to let go, and you learn to be like, you know what you're doing here, you know. And so Dave and I definitely developed that kind of relationship, and to the point where, for instance, we're working on a later issue in TERRORWAR now, where there's like a kind of mini side story. It's just like 4 or 5 pages, and he just went in and scripted that. He didn't script it, but went in and drew it. Like, here's what I think will happen. He went in and drew the action, and I'll go in and put in the words for the characters, right? So,
and it was just so gorgeous. You're like, you know what? You're right. We're gonna go with this.
Yeah. That's 9 times out of 10 when an artist is like, I think we should do this instead. unless it's something insane, which it very rarely is. I'm like, yes, you're smarter than I am. Thank you.
And speaking of issue 3, we have that link for the preview world dropping right now in chat. So if you guys are watching, be sure to pre-order that today. But if you're unable to pre-order it, put it on Twitter and Facebook. Word of mouth is always 100% free. I mean, issue 2 was just as crazy, if not a little bit crazier than issue 1. We have a big duo going off head to head, and things get an even more climatic cliffhanger. What can we expect in issue 3? You said there was going to be a little sub story, but I mean, maybe give us a little bit of the juice if you can.
Yeah. So to me, I like stories that start locally and grow, right? So with TERRORWAR, we literally start in Muhammad's bedroom, right? And then we get to Muhammad's immediate block. Then we're kind of seeing what his neighborhood is like, right? In this past issue 2, we've sort of seen his local bar where him and the rest of the crew hang, his girlfriend. And the scope, though, the idea is that Blue City is a city of 100 million people, right? So this is like the last city on Earth. This is where everybody went. So Muhammad really, he feels like he's a guy who knows his way around the block, but he only knows his little 2 inches of each city. So what we're going to see, previewed by the fact that these sort of armored riot cops show up at the end of I guess that was a bit of a spoiler. As we see a bit of a preview of in issue 2, the larger world of Blue City, the government, the powers that be, and the forces that shape this kind of war that they're fighting on the streets become more prevalent. I'm always interested in those bigger societal questions. Who's pulling the strings? Who's got the power? Who's got the money? And so Muhammad's going to kind of come out of his little neighborhood world with his team, and they're going to get a glimpse of a world that they really didn't quite knew existed.
Ooh, sounds like it could be a rude awakening for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, no. So, guys, right there is the link. Be sure to check that out. So, I mean, this isn't all that you have going on for you. We have some new issues coming out, of course. Issue 3 of this is coming out in June 21st. What about STARSIGNS? Is there an issue 2 coming out soon for that as well?
Issue 2 just dropped this month, June, this week, as a matter of fact. Okay. And issue 3 will be out in July. Yeah.
So, but that's not all. You just recently signed, Daredevil in September. Holy crap. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a busy guy. I Daredevil is it's kind of like that's one of the the bucket list things, because so when I first wrote I wrote Black Bolt, right? People received the comic very well, but I had a little bit of a cheat in the fact that there not been a lot done on him, right? So unless I really screwed it up, people who liked the character were going to just be like, "Thank you for taking some time to spend on Blackagar Boltagon," right? And so you fleshing out this fairly obscure character, even if they've been around for decades, and kind of making them more fully alive, that's one kind of job, right? And then I wrote. You can tell I'm a writer. Then I wrote Miles Morales and Kamala's book, Magnificent Ms. Marvel. And those were a different kind of job. They were both sort of taking over a fairly new character as the first regular writer after the character's creator, right? And that was really about, with both characters, sort of shepherding those characters from these characters who had just been created and being written by their creators into becoming larger Marvel Universe characters and really shoring up their legacy. But with Daredevil, it's neither of those things. Daredevil is the guy who, since Frank Miller, Annie Nocenti, he's been the guy who the kind of writer's writer book, where you can get a little bit weirder, a little bit darker, a little bit more grown up, I dare to say, than you can in some other Marvel comics. And it's an intimidating tradition because of that, right? I just reread for the first time in 20 years, Born Again. And, there are high bars with this character. And following Chip Zdarsky's run is super stressful, but I when they threw the chance at me, I had to take a swing because I have a crazy storyline, for Matt. That's a bigger kind of status quo break and a bigger sort of like taking a spin on the character that I don't think's been quite done before, I think, and that feels fun to do.
And I can't wait to see your approach with this character in Hell's Kitchen. So you begin work. Is that the issue coming out in September? Or you begin work in September?
Oh no. The first couple issues are written, and first issue and change I think is drawn. Aaron Cooter is who I'm working with on the book, and he's always done great work, but he's really leveled up with this book. I think there's, again, something about this character that draws that out in creators, and so it's good. It's freaking gorgeous.
That's phenomenal. So last but not least, I know this is your first time on the show, but we always love, anytime I have a creator coming on asking for a little bit of advice, and as someone who's just had an outstanding history in writing, and you said you kind of started a little late with your comic history, I think you'd be the perfect person to ask this piece of advice for. So for anyone out there just struggling getting going, no matter what age they're at, they just have a hard time putting that pencil to paper, fingers to keyboard, and just getting started. What would be your biggest piece of advice to kind of help them just get going?
I think there's two parts of it for me. I think the first part is, a lot of times when people ask, like, how do I write? Sometimes it's what you're talking about. It's somebody who just can't take those first steps. But a lot of times it's somebody who's writing and they're stressing about, they're fantasizing and stressing about the next step, about quote unquote making it, right? And I've been there. Believe me, that's like when you're writing and you're working in obscurity, that's what you sit there and think about, is like, this is going to be the thing I write that's going to make it. How do I break in and stuff? And the thing I wish I'd been able to go back to tell myself when I was younger was just focus on completing projects. Write a whole comic book, right? Find an artist to work with, complete several projects, build your skills as you do so, right? And not get too caught up in stressing like the career aspects of it, because it can paralyze you doing that. Creatively, though, I think that so that's the kind of like professional kind of meta thing. I think creatively, the biggest piece of advice, I'll give two pieces of advice. One is the biggest, I don't know if I'll call it a mistake, but the piece of advice I'd give most often to comics fans in particular who talk about this is to read other stuff. There are a lot of comics fans who only read comics. Some folks will only read Marvel, only read DC, or only read Big Two. But even if you branch out to Image stuff or whatever else, read other things, read histories, read poetry, read religious texts. I'm somebody who spent decades just like, anytime there's a book within 30 feet of me, consume it, right? And that's part of how you get to be a good writer, is having lots and lots and lots and lots of models floating around in your brain. So that's my professional thing is create something. Don't stress the like making it part, breaking in, just make the thing. The inspiration part is read diversely, right? And finally, pragmatically, if you've gotten to the point where you feel influenced, feel good, you're going to write a script, just a little trick that I tend to like is, you write the first few pages of something and then write the last page, right? Because a lot of times people try to write their way forward toward an ending and get lost. And if you have an ending written, even if it eventually changes, and then you have a beginning, you're sort of building a bridge between two things that are established, rather than just sort of, building a bridge into air and not knowing where it's going to end up. So that's my little.
I love that, and thank you for giving us some extra advice with that as well. I think that is a big thing. I mean, everyone wants to write for the big two. I feel like if you're a creator, you want DC or Marvel, but the thing is, you're not able to put out work on a schedule and put out stuff that readers are going to want to read, that you won't have a shot, right? Like, you got to build that endurance. You have to build that muscle to be able to pump it out. or you'll just sink, you know. So I think earning your keep, I guess, is an easy way to put a word to it. Phenomenal advice there. Last but not least, I mean, outside of creating, what are you consuming? What books are you reading? What movies, TV shows are you watching? If you play video games, you know, are you diving in Diablo 4 maybe?
I haven't broken into Diablo 4 yet. Yeah, it's funny. I read alarmingly little these days because my brain just can't do it. I work with words all day long as my job, and when I want to shut my brain down, I tend not to read. So I did read a good novel for the first time in a long time. I read a novel. My Heart is a Chainsaw is the name of the novel. Stephen Graham Jones, I believe, is the author's name. He's a Native writer, a Native American writer, horror writer. And it's a slasher novel, basically. I've never read something that felt so scarily like when you watch a good scary movie. It's really an awesome book called Shubek Lubek by Dima Muhammad, and it translates to "Your Wish is My Command," essentially. And it's a graphic novel that came out from Pantheon Books recently. Really one of the best books I've read in many, many years. She's an Egyptian graphic novelist, and it's a 3-part story about, like, basically if wishes were real, right? If Jinn granting wishes were real, and it's just mind-blowingly good. So, but mostly I play video games. That's how I spend almost all of my free time when I'm not taking care of my kids or you know, going out to dinner with somebody or something like that, is sitting at home on my PlayStation or Switch. So I got pretty deep into Tears of the Kingdom, but then the new Street Fighter came out, and so now that's what I'm fiddling with. It's a hell of a lot of fun.
See, for me, before comics, I was a big Twitch streamer, so I played all the new games that dropped. That's how I have all the fancy setup and everything. And then someone's like, "You got a good voice." I was like, you know what? Maybe I have a good voice. I'll start talking to people. But so Tears of the Kingdom, definitely been playing that. I was doing Wulong Fallen Dynasty.
I tried that. Yeah.
I'm a big Bloodborne fan. I love Soulsborne games.
Oh, okay. So it's so funny. Yeah, no, I do too, and that's why I picked it up. But yeah, the Team Ninja games, they just don't feel the same. They're too complicated. There's something about Soulsborne games that, even though they demand this skill from you, there's a kind of a simplicity to them that I find really elegant. I had to be sold on that storytelling mode, you know, of like you piece together the lore from finding like a
ring or something
lore somewhere, right? But yeah, I Elden Ring is what hooked me. I had not tried one before that, but then I went back and like Demon Souls, the Dark Souls 3.
Oh my god, I got this little guy from Dark Souls 3 too, like the little rock lizard.
I love those games. And it's funny because people have actually said to me, like, "Oh, you should stream. You play video games all the time. You got a social media presence." And I'm like, if I was a streamer, it would just be me, "Fuck you," and while I'm playing Souls, well, this is bullshit.
That hitbox is messed up.
Exactly.
Yeah, something about those bosses, like, you know, when you first see it, it's just huge, and you're like, dude, how the fuck do I even approach this thing? But like your third time through, you're like, okay, well, I just roll to the left, roll through his attack. Attack, roll, and it gets so simple, like you said. And maybe it's that muscle of just training yourself to work under pressure. That's what you do. You train that, and then you just go in there and you annihilate everything. But yeah, it's something about Soulsborne games. I hope we get a Bloodborne remake. I heard the Blue Point, the one that handled Demon Souls, was supposed to rumored be working on it, but who knows?
Wow, that'd be great. Yeah, I've never played Bloodborne. I have it actually literally sitting right now because I was about to run out on PlayStation 5 or whatever it's called, and so I downloaded it, but I haven't played it yet. I will get to it because people
30 frames per second, but it's my favorite. The story's so good. It's like gothic, like UK gothic vibes in it. I mean, it's very, very awesome. And the thing is, like Dark Souls 3, you know, you go with a shield. Bloodborne, you get a gun. You don't get a shield, so you have to be aggressive. So it's like a whole different play style.
The play style is different. Yeah. That's cool.
Man, we could talk video games all day. I do have to wrap this up. So thank you so much for swinging by. This was one hell of a podcast. I hope everyone watching has a fantastic day as well. Most importantly, guys, keep it geekly.